The summer of 1931 brought more than heat to Harlem's streets. It brought Dutch Schultz. Bumpy Johnson stood at the window of Small's Paradise, watching the neighborhood he'd protected for years. At 34, he'd earned every scar on his body defending these blocks. The people here trusted him. They knew Bumpy kept order, settled disputes, made sure families could run their numbers without getting robbed. Now everything was changing. "He's making moves," said Junie, Bumpy's oldest friend. "Dutch sent 10 men to 125th Street yesterday. Told Vincent he works for the Bronx now." Bumpy didn't turn from the window. Vincent ran a clean numbers operation, paid his people fair, helped widows when rent came due. Good men like Vincent made Harlem work. What did Vincent say? Said no, they broke his arm. The muscle in Bumpy's jaw tightened. This was how Dutch Schultz operated. Not with respect or negotiation, but with terror. The Bronx gangster had built his empire on violence, and now he wanted Harlem's profitable numbers racket for himself. "Get everyone together," Bumpy said quietly. "Tonight." Junie nodded and left. Bumpy remained at the window, watching mothers walk children home from school, watching old men play chess on the corner, watching life continue as it had for years. These people didn't know war was coming. They didn't know Dutch Schultz's men were already in their neighborhood, threatening their livelihoods. But Bumpy knew. He'd built something here, not just a criminal empire, but a community. The numbers game gave poor folks hope. A nickel bet could mean groceries for a week. The system worked because people like Bumpy made it fair. Dutch Schultz didn't care about fair. He only understood power. And power, Bumpy thought, watching the sunset paint Harlem gold, was about to be tested. 20 men filled the back room of the Cotton Club that night. These were Harlem's operators, the ones who ran numbers, who employed hundreds, who kept money flowing through the neighborhood. They looked worried. Bumpy stood before them, calm as always. "You all know why we're here," he began. "Dutch Schultz thinks Harlem belongs to him now. He's wrong. He's got 100 men," said Raymond, who ran operations in Sugar Hill. "We can't fight the Bronx." "We're not fighting the Bronx," Bumpy replied. "We're protecting Harlem. There's a difference." He walked slowly between the tables, making eye contact with each man. These weren't soldiers. They were businessmen who'd built something from nothing. But they needed to understand what was at stake. "Dutch sees numbers," Bumpy continued. "He sees profit. He doesn't see the families who depend on this work. He doesn't see the communities we support. He wants to take our operations and bleed them dry." "So what do we do?" asked Thomas, the youngest operator present. "We stand together," Bumpy said simply. "Dutch is strong because he's unified. We're stronger because we're right. This is our home." He pulled out a map of Harlem, spreading it across the table. Red marks showed where Dutch's men had appeared in recent weeks. The pattern was clear. They were testing defenses, looking for weakness. "They'll hit the weakest operations first," Bumpy explained. "Try to scare everyone into surrendering. We don't let that happen. From tonight forward, nobody operates alone. We share resources, we share protection, we share information." "You're asking us to trust each other," Raymond said carefully. Bumpy nodded. "I'm asking us to be what Dutch can never be, a real community. Not just criminals taking money, but neighbors protecting neighbors." The room went quiet. Outside, jazz drifted from the club's main floor. Inside, 20 men faced the biggest decision of their lives. One by one, they nodded. Dutch Schultz's response came 3 days later. Bumpy was eating breakfast at Sylvia's when Junie burst through the door, blood on his shirt. "They hit Willie's place," Junie gasped. "Burned it to the ground." Bumpy was already moving, his food forgotten. Willie ran a small numbers bank on Lenox Avenue, employed 12 people, mostly women who needed the work. He was 63 years old and had never hurt anyone. The street was chaos when they arrived. Flames consumed Willie's storefront while neighbors formed bucket brigades, desperately trying to save the building. But Bumpy wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking at Willie, sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. Bumpy knelt beside the old man. "You hurt?" Willie shook his head. "They came at dawn. 5 men, said this was a message from Dutch Schultz. Join him or burn." "Where are your people?" "Sent them home before opening, thank God." Willie looked up, tears cutting through the soot on his face. 40 years I've been in this neighborhood, Bumpy. 40 years. I helped build this place. Bumpy put a hand on Willie's shoulder. Around them, neighbors still fought the fire, but everyone was listening. This moment would define everything. "You're going to rebuild," Bumpy said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Better than before. And Dutch Schultz is going to pay for every brick." A murmur ran through the crowd. People who'd been afraid suddenly looked hopeful. "How?" Willie asked quietly. Bumpy stood, addressing everyone now. "Because we're not criminals hiding in shadows. We're Harlem. We're family. And family protects its own." Later that night, Bumpy sat in his apartment with his closest advisors. The message from Dutch was clear: surrender or suffer. But Bumpy had sent his own message back. This was war now, but it would be fought Bumpy's way: smart, strategic, and always protecting the innocent. Bumpy's apartment became a war room. Maps covered every wall, showing Harlem's neighborhoods, Dutch's known locations, and potential targets. But this wasn't a plan for attack, it was a plan for protection. "He expects us to retaliate," Bumpy explained to his inner circle. "Expects violence. That's his game, and he's better at it than us. So we don't play." "Then what do we do?" asked Junie. "Let him burn us out one by one." "We make Harlem impossible to conquer," Bumpy replied. He pointed to the map. "Dutch's strength is fear. He hurts people until they submit. Our strength is community. We protect people until they trust us." He outlined the strategy. Every numbers operation would have watchers. Neighbors paid to report suspicious activity. Every street would have a system. 3 whistles meant danger, everyone disappears. The legitimate businesses would serve as cover, with real owners running fronts, while the numbers operations moved underground. "It's not about fighting Dutch's men," Bumpy continued. "It's about making Harlem so organized, so tight, that he can't get a foothold. Every time he hits us, we adapt. Every time he burns a building, we rebuild. We outlast him." Raymond leaned forward. "That takes money." "A lot of money." Bumpy nodded. "I know. I'm putting up half my savings to start. The rest of you contribute what you can. This investment protects all of us. And if Dutch keeps burning us faster than we rebuild, then we go after his money," Bumpy said calmly. "Not his men, his money. Dutch funds his operation through the Bronx. He's got breweries, warehouses, legitimate businesses. We find them, we expose them to the police, we make his Bronx operations expensive." The strategy was risky. It required everyone working together, sharing resources, trusting each other. It meant thinking months ahead while dealing with daily threats. But it was smart. And in Bumpy's experience, smart always beats strong in the end. "Get word to all the operators," he said. "Starting tomorrow, we implement the new system. And someone get me information on Dutch's Bronx operations. Every business, every warehouse, every judge he owns." The meeting ended near dawn, but nobody looked tired. For the first time since Dutch Schultz arrived in Harlem, they had a plan. Sunday morning, Bumpy visited 5 churches, not as a gangster, but as a neighbor. At Abyssinian Baptist, he waited outside until service ended. Families poured out, dressed in their Sunday best. Bumpy stood near the steps, not hiding, just present. People nodded as they passed. Some stopped to shake his hand. Reverend Clayton appeared last, a tall man with kind eyes and a voice that could shake foundations. "Mr. Johnson," he said carefully, "unusual to see you here. Need to talk to you, Reverend, about protecting the neighborhood." They walked to a nearby park, away from ears. Bumpy explained the situation simply. Dutch Schultz was threatening Harlem's people, and he needed the community's help to stop it. "You're asking churches to help gangsters?" Reverend Clayton asked. "I'm asking churches to help their own people," Bumpy corrected. "The women who work for our operations, they're your parishioners. The families who play the numbers, they sit in your pews. I'm not a good man, Reverend, but I protect this neighborhood. Dutch Schultz will just bleed it dry." Reverend Clayton was quiet for a long moment. "What do you need?" "Safe houses. When Dutch's men come, people need places to hide. Churches are sacred, even monsters respect that. And I need you to talk to your congregation. Tell them to report strangers. Tell them to look out for each other." "You're asking me to choose sides in a gang war." Bumpy shook his head. "I'm asking you to choose Harlem over the Bronx. That's all." The Reverend studied him. "My congregation stays safe. No violence near the churches. No bringing trouble to innocent people." "You have my word." They shook hands. By the end of Sunday, Bumpy had visited 5 churches and received 5 similar promises. The community was mobilizing. But the real test came Monday morning when Dutch's men tried to hit another numbers operation on 132nd Street. They arrived to find the building empty and surrounded by 50 neighbors, just watching. No weapons, no threats, just people standing together. The Bronx men looked at each other, uncertain. This wasn't how intimidation worked. They left without burning anything. Word spread fast. Harlem was protecting itself. The report reached Dutch Schultz while he was eating lunch at a Bronx steakhouse. His man stammered through the story. 50 people, no violence, just standing there. Dutch threw his plate across the room. "They're just standing there?" he roared. "And you ran away?" "Boss, there were 50 of them." "I don't care if there were 1,000. Dutch's face turned purple. "You work for me. You take what I tell you to take." Arthur Flegenheimer, that was Dutch's real name, had built his empire on being the most violent man in any room. He'd murdered competitors, bribed cops, and terrorized entire neighborhoods. Nobody stood up to him because standing up meant dying. But Harlem wasn't backing down. "This Bumpy Johnson?" Dutch said quietly, dangerously calm now. "Tell me about him." His lieutenant, a brutal man named Lulu Rosenkrantz, provided the details. "Smart operator. Been in Harlem for years. The people there, they respect him. He settles disputes, helps families, keeps things organized. He's a criminal. Yes, boss, but he's their criminal." Dutch understood the problem immediately. He'd conquered territories before by breaking the leaders, but Bumpy had made himself part of the community. You couldn't break Harlem without breaking Bumpy, and you couldn't break Bumpy without turning the whole neighborhood against you. It was actually impressive strategy. Dutch would never admit it, but he recognized smart opposition when he saw it. "So we can't scare them," Dutch mused. "Fine, we hurt them. Find everyone who works with Bumpy Johnson, family, friends, associates. Find them and make them suffer." "Boss, that's a lot of people." "I don't care." Dutch slammed his fist on the table. "I want Harlem broken. I want them begging to join me. I want Bumpy Johnson watching his entire world burn until he has no choice but to surrender." Lulu nodded and left. Dutch sat alone, staring at his map of New York. The Bronx was his. Manhattan would be his soon. But first, he needed to make an example of Harlem. He needed to show New York that nobody, not even beloved community protectors, could stand against Dutch Schultz. They took Bumpy's cousin Samuel on a Tuesday night. Samuel was a postal worker, not a criminal. He had 3 kids and a wife who sang in the church choir. His only connection to Bumpy was blood and occasional Sunday dinners. When Bumpy got the news, his whole body went cold. "Where?" he asked quietly. "Bronx," Junie replied, his face ashen. Dutch's men grabbed him after his shift, left a message: "Stop organizing or Samuel dies." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. Dutch wasn't just fighting Bumpy anymore. He was attacking innocence itself. "We can raid his Bronx operations," Raymond suggested. "Hit him back." "That's what he wants," Bumpy said, forcing himself to think clearly despite the rage building inside him. "He wants me emotional, making mistakes. Samuel is bait." "So we do nothing? Let Dutch kill your cousin?" Bumpy looked at his closest friends. "We do what we've always done. We protect our own. But smart." He made calls. Within an hour he had information. Samuel was being held at a Bronx warehouse guarded by 5 men. Dutch planned to torture him publicly as a warning to Harlem. "I'm going in," Bumpy announced. "That's suicide," Junie protested. "No, it's negotiation." Bumpy checked his gun, then put it away. "I'm going unarmed. I'm going to talk to Dutch directly." "He'll kill you." "Maybe, but he's a businessman first, and I'm going to offer him something he wants more than Harlem: peace with profit." It was a massive risk. Dutch Schultz was unpredictable, violent, and proud, but Bumpy understood something important. Dutch's real goal wasn't conquest. It was money. The Bronx gangster was spending resources on Harlem that he could be using elsewhere. "If I don't come back," Bumpy said calmly, "Junie takes over. You continue the strategy, protect the community, stay organized, don't retaliate violently. Promise me." One by one, they promised. Bumpy walked out into the night, heading for the Bronx without weapons, without backup, with nothing but his intelligence and his willingness to sacrifice himself for family. It was the longest walk of his life. Dutch Schultz's warehouse smelled of beer and fear. Bumpy walked in alone, hands visible, moving slowly. 10 guns pointed at him immediately. "I'm here to talk to Dutch," Bumpy said calmly. "About my cousin, about Harlem, about ending this war." Lulu Rosencrantz appeared from the shadows. "You got guts, Johnson. Stupid, but guts." "I got family. There's a difference." They searched him roughly, found no weapons, then led him deeper into the warehouse. Samuel was there, tied to a chair, beaten but alive. Their eyes met briefly. Bumpy's steady, reassuring, Samuel's terrified. Dutch Schultz sat behind a desk smoking a cigar, looking like death in an expensive suit. "Bumpy Johnson," Dutch said, almost pleased. "Finally? I was starting to think you were a coward hiding behind Harlem's skirts." "I came to negotiate," Bumpy replied, ignoring the insult. "Negotiate?" Dutch laughed coldly. "You don't have anything I want. I'll take Harlem by force." "You could," Bumpy agreed. "Would cost you 6 months and $500,000. You'd lose men, lose resources, gain nothing but a neighborhood that hates you." Dutch's eyes narrowed. "You're awful confident for a man surrounded by my guns." "I'm confident because I understand business. You want Harlem's numbers racket. You think it's profitable, but you're wrong. It's only profitable because the community cooperates. Force them, and they stop playing. You'd be fighting for an empty prize." Bumpy stepped closer, ignoring the guns. "But I can give you what you actually want, steady income from Harlem without the war. You take 40% of the profits, my operators stay in control, the community keeps running smooth." 40%? Dutch's face darkened. "I could take 100%. "No," Bumpy said simply. "You could take 0%, because I'll burn every numbers bank myself before I let you destroy what we've built. You'll get nothing but ashes." The room went silent. It was an insane bluff, threatening to destroy his own empire. But Bumpy said it with such calm certainty that even Dutch hesitated. "You're crazy," Dutch finally said. "I'm committed. There's a difference. 40% of something is better than 100% of nothing, and you save resources for your real enemies." Dutch studied him for a long moment. "You think you're smart, don't you?" "I think I'm realistic. War costs us both. Peace profits us both. Simple math. What happened next would determine everything." Dutch Schultz smoked his cigar slowly, studying Bumpy like a card player trying to spot a bluff. The warehouse was silent except for Samuel's labored breathing. 40%, Dutch finally said. "And I want full accounting. Any operator who cheats me dies." 35%, Bumpy countered. "And no violence against Harlem residents. You get paid, we stay independent, everyone makes money." "You're negotiating? With guns pointed at your head?" Bumpy smiled slightly. "You already decided not to kill me. If you wanted me dead, I wouldn't have made it past the door. You brought me here to talk because you're smart enough to know war is expensive." Dutch's expression flickered. Surprise, then respect, then calculation. "You're right. I am smart. Smart enough to know that letting you leave alive makes me look weak." "It makes you look strategic," Bumpy replied. "Every gangster in New York uses violence. Only the smart ones know when not to. You make this deal, word spreads. Dutch Schultz is strong enough to turn enemies into assets. That's real power." The psychology was delicate. Dutch's entire reputation was built on brutality, but Bumpy was offering him something better. Respect through strategy instead of fear through violence. 35%, Dutch said slowly. "Monthly payments delivered personally by you. Miss a payment, the deal's off and we go to war." "Agreed. My cousin goes free unharmed." "He's already free." Dutch gestured and his men untied Samuel. "I'm a businessman, Johnson. I don't hurt people for fun, just for profit." It was a lie, but Bumpy didn't challenge it. He'd gotten what he came for. "One more thing," Dutch added, as Bumpy helped Samuel stand. "This deal is between us. Your operators never know they're paying me. Far as they know, you just got stronger. Understand?" Bumpy understood perfectly. Dutch wanted the profit without looking like he'd compromised. It was actually smart, saved face while securing income. Agreed. They didn't shake hands, men like them didn't. But they nodded, acknowledging the terms. As Bumpy walked Samuel out of the warehouse, every gun stayed pointed at them until they reached the door. Outside, Harlem waited in the darkness. "You really gonna pay him?" Samuel asked weakly. "Every month," Bumpy replied. "Small price for peace." But in his mind, Bumpy was already planning. The deal bought time, stopped the immediate violence, saved innocent lives. But it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a longer game. Back in Harlem, Bumpy called an emergency meeting. Only his most trusted advisors attended: Junie, Raymond, Thomas, and 3 others who'd proven their loyalty over years. "We have a deal with Dutch," Bumpy announced. 35% of our profits, paid monthly. The war is over. Relief flooded the room. Thank God, Raymond breathed. For now, Bumpy added quietly. But I need you to understand something. This isn't a real peace. It's a strategic pause. He spread new maps across the table, but these weren't of Harlem. They showed the Bronx, Dutch's territory, his operations, his vulnerabilities. Dutch Schultz thinks he won, Bumpy explained. He thinks we surrendered. That's exactly what I want him to think. While he's comfortable collecting his payments, we're going to do something he'll never expect. What? Asked Junie. We're going to make him irrelevant. Bumpy outlined a plan that would take months, maybe years. First, they'd pay Dutch exactly as promised, building trust, proving reliability. Meanwhile, they'd quietly expand Harlem's numbers operations, making them more efficient, more profitable. The 35% they paid Dutch would hurt less as total profits grew. But the real strategy was more subtle. Bumpy had learned something during his Bronx visit. Dutch's empire was large but vulnerable. He bribed cops, but those bribes cost money. He ran breweries, but prohibition was ending. He had muscle, but muscle required constant payment. We're going to wait, Bumpy said. Wait for Dutch to overextend himself. Wait for his enemies to multiply. And when he's weak, when he's fighting other battles, we stop paying. We become too expensive to fight, too organized to break. That could take years, Thomas pointed out. Good things do, Bumpy replied. This isn't about winning a battle, it's about building something that lasts. Dutch thinks in terms of months, we think in terms of generations. Raymond leaned back, understanding dawning. You're playing a completely different game than he is. Exactly. Dutch wants immediate control. We want permanent independence. He'll get bored with Harlem eventually, find easier targets, and when he does, we'll still be here, stronger than ever. It was the ultimate long-term strategy. Appear to lose in order to really win. Pay the tribute, keep the peace, and slowly build a position so strong that Dutch could never threaten them again. Until then, Bumpy concluded, we operate exactly as promised. Perfect cooperation. No revenge plots, no resistance. We make Dutch think we're beaten. While we're actually preparing, Junie finished. Bumpy nodded. While we're actually thriving. 6 months passed. Every month, Bumpy delivered 35% of Harlem's profits to the Bronx, personally carrying the money to Dutch's warehouse. The payments were always exact, always on time. Dutch grew comfortable. Meanwhile, Harlem transformed. With the threat of violence removed, the numbers operations expanded carefully. New runners joined, more families played, the system grew more efficient. Bumpy invested the profits back into the community, fixing buildings, helping struggling families, supporting local businesses. You're spending money on people who aren't even part of the operation, Raymond noted one evening. I'm investing in loyalty, Bumpy corrected. Every family we help becomes a family that protects us. Dutch has soldiers, we have neighbors. When the time comes, neighbors are stronger. The strategy was working. Harlem's operations grew 30% in 6 months. Even after paying Dutch, they were making more money than before the war, and the community was more organized, more connected, more resilient. But Bumpy was also gathering information. Every visit to the Bronx, he observed. Dutch was fighting 3 different rivals now, spending money on multiple fronts. The Bronx Empire was profitable but stretched thin. Police raids were increasing, legal troubles were mounting. He's getting desperate, Junie reported after watching Dutch's Bronx operations. He's raising protection rates, putting pressure on everyone. People are scared. Scared people make mistakes, Bumpy observed. Dutch built his empire on fear, but fear only works until people get tired of being afraid. In Harlem, meanwhile, something different was happening. The numbers operations were running so smoothly that they required less violence, less intimidation, less criminal activity. People played because they wanted to, because it was fun, because the system was fair. Bumpy was accidentally creating something legitimate. We're becoming a business, Thomas observed. A real business. Bumpy nodded. That's exactly what we're becoming. And that's why we'll outlast Dutch. He's still a gangster. We're evolving. By the end of the year, Harlem's operations were generating twice what they had before Dutch's invasion. The community was prosperous, organized, and loyal. And Dutch Schultz, comfortable with his monthly tribute, never suspected that his victory was actually his defeat. The long game was working. By early 1933, Dutch Schultz's empire was crumbling from the inside. The police raided his largest brewery, costing him $200,000. His numbers operations in the Bronx faced competition from Italian mobsters who were better organized and more brutal. His lawyer bills were mounting as the government investigated his tax evasion. And through it all, Harlem kept paying its tribute, 35% every month, exactly on time. Dutch started depending on that money. Bumpy noticed during his monthly visits, the warehouse was less guarded now. Dutch himself seemed distracted, talking about his legal troubles, complaining about the Italians. "You ever have problems with competition?" Dutch asked one day as Bumpy delivered the payment. "Sometimes," Bumpy replied carefully. "We handle it through cooperation, not violence. Make the market bigger for everyone instead of fighting over the same territory." Dutch laughed bitterly. That don't work in the real world. But it did work in Harlem. While Dutch fought expensive wars on every front, Bumpy was building alliances, creating systems, establishing trust. Two completely different approaches to the same business. "Things getting rough in the Bronx?" Bumpy asked, knowing the answer. "Nothing I can't handle," Dutch snapped, pride forcing the lie. But they both knew the truth. Dutch Schultz's days of easy dominance were ending. Prohibition was being repealed, removing his most profitable business. The government was closing in on his taxes. His rivals smelled blood. Back in Harlem, Bumpy called another private meeting. "Dutch is weak," he announced. "Weaker than he's ever been. The question is, when do we stop paying?" "Now," said Raymond immediately. "Why wait?" "Because timing is everything," Bumpy replied. "We stop too soon, he comes after us with everything he has left. We stop too late, he recovers. We need to wait for the perfect moment, when he's so overwhelmed with other problems that Harlem becomes too expensive to reclaim." "How will we know when that is?" asked Thomas. Bumpy smiled. "When his enemies are at his door, when the government is breathing down his neck, when he's fighting for his life instead of his empire. Then we stop paying. Then we become free." It was a cold calculation, but necessary. They'd paid Dutch over $100,000 in tribute over the past year. Every dollar hurt. But every dollar also bought time, bought growth, bought the strength to eventually stand independent. "Keep watching the Bronx," Bumpy ordered. "I want to know every time Dutch gets hit, every lawsuit, every rival move. When the moment comes, we need to be ready." The moment was coming soon. They could all feel it. 3 months later, the trap sprang, not on Dutch, but on them. Federal agents raided Harlem's largest numbers bank on a Tuesday morning. They arrested 12 people, seized records, and shut down the operation. Word spread quickly. Someone had informed on them. Bumpy's first thought was Dutch Schultz. "He's setting us up," Raymond said urgently. "Takes our money, then turns us into the feds. He destroys us without fighting." But something didn't add up. Bumpy studied the raid carefully. The agents had known exactly where to go, exactly what to look for. But they'd only hit one operation, not the whole network. And they'd taken the records, but hadn't arrested the top operators. "This wasn't Dutch," Bumpy said slowly. "Dutch would have hit everything at once, tried to destroy us completely. This is something else." He sent Junie to investigate. The answer came back within hours. The informant was Vincent, the same man who'd been beaten when Dutch first came to Harlem. Vincent? Bumpy couldn't believe it. Why would he betray us? The reason was heartbreaking. Vincent's son had been arrested for a crime he didn't commit. The police offered a deal, information about Harlem's numbers operations in exchange for his son's freedom. "He didn't want to," Junie explained quietly. "The cops forced him, his kid or his friends, that was the choice." Bumpy felt anger, then understanding, then sadness. This was the real cost of their business. They operated outside the law, which meant the law could always be used against them. Vincent hadn't betrayed them out of malice. He'd been caught in an impossible situation. "Where is he now?" Bumpy asked. "Hiding. Thinks you'll kill him." Bumpy found Vincent in a basement apartment in Sugar Hill, looking broken. The old man started apologizing immediately, tears running down his face. "I had no choice, Bumpy. My boy, they were going to send him away for years. I had to." "I know," Bumpy said quietly, sitting beside him. "You did what you had to do for family. I understand that." Vincent looked up shocked. "You're not going to kill me?" "No, I'm going to help you." Bumpy pulled out money, $5,000, more than Vincent would see in years. Take your son and leave New York. Start fresh somewhere else. You were a good man who got caught in a bad situation. That's not your fault. The mercy surprised everyone, including Vincent. But Bumpy understood something important. True strength wasn't punishing people for being human. It was protecting them despite their mistakes. After Vincent left, Junie asked the obvious question. Dutch is going to hear about this raid. What happens when he thinks we're vulnerable? Bumpy smiled grimly. Then he makes his move, and we'll be ready. The summons came 2 days later. Dutch wanted to meet in person, not at his warehouse, but at a restaurant in neutral territory. Bumpy went alone, as always. Dutch looked terrible. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. The Bronx gangster was fighting too many battles, and it showed. I heard about your raid, Dutch said without preamble. Bad luck. We'll recover. Bumpy replied calmly. Will you? Dutch leaned forward. Because I'm thinking maybe your luck is running out. Maybe it's time I took over Harlem operations completely. Direct control instead of tribute. There it was, the moment Bumpy had been preparing for. Dutch was desperate, seeing Harlem as a solution to his mounting problems. He wanted to seize full control while they appeared weak. That would be a mistake, Bumpy said quietly. Would it? I got the muscle, you got the problems. Seems like good timing to me. Bumpy pulled out an envelope. Inside was the monthly tribute payment, 35%, exactly as promised. But also something else, detailed records of Dutch's tax evasion, compiled over months of careful investigation. That's a copy, Bumpy explained as Dutch's face went pale. Originals are with lawyers, with instructions to deliver them to the federal government if anything happens to me or Harlem's operations. Dutch's hand shook as he held the papers. You were planning this from the beginning. I was protecting my community from the beginning, Bumpy corrected. The tribute was never surrendered, Dutch. It was insurance. We paid you to leave us alone, and we gathered evidence to keep you away permanently. You're blackmailing me? I'm offering you a choice. Bumpy stood, leaving the payment on the table. Keep taking the monthly tribute and stay out of Harlem's business. Or try to take over and watch your empire collapse when the government gets those records. Your call. It was the ultimate reversal. For 18 months, Dutch had thought he controlled Harlem, but Bumpy had been controlling him, using the payments as a way to buy time, gather intelligence, and build an unassailable position. Dutch Schultz understood immediately. He was trapped. Fighting Harlem now meant losing everything. You're smarter than I thought, Dutch said bitterly. I'm a survivor, Bumpy replied, and Harlem survives by being smarter than it is strong. He walked out of the restaurant, leaving Dutch Schultz with the worst choice of his life, accept permanent defeat or risk total destruction. The war was over. Harlem had won, not through violence but through patience, intelligence, and strategy. The next month, Bumpy made his final payment to Dutch Schultz, not the regular tribute but a lump sum, $50,000. What's this? Dutch asked suspiciously. A buyout, Bumpy explained. You take this payment, you sign an agreement staying out of Harlem permanently, and we're done. No more monthly tributes, no more relationship. You get $50,000 today instead of waiting years for small payments. Dutch calculated quickly. His legal troubles were mounting, his empire shrinking. $50,000 in cash, immediate, was worth more than the promise of future tribute from an increasingly independent Harlem. And the records? Stay with the lawyers. As long as you honor the agreement, they stay buried. You break the agreement, they get released. Simple insurance. It was actually genius. Bumpy was buying freedom, but framing it as if he was doing Dutch a favor. The cash payment let Dutch save face while ending their relationship permanently. Dutch signed the agreement. They didn't shake hands, didn't pretend friendship, but the war was officially over. Back in Harlem, Bumpy gathered all the operators, not just his inner circle, but everyone involved in the numbers racket. Over 100 people filled the Cotton Club's back room. We're free, Bumpy announced. No more tribute to the Bronx. No more threats. Harlem belongs to Harlem again. The room erupted in cheers, but Bumpy raised his hand for silence. We won because we stayed united, he continued. Because we protected each other instead of just protecting profits. Because we built a community, not just a criminal enterprise. That's how we stay free, by remembering what really matters. He outlined new rules. The operations would become more legitimate, paying taxes on legitimate businesses that covered the illegal ones. They'd establish a fund to help operators in trouble, to bail out arrested runners, to support families hurt by the business. "We're not just gangsters anymore," Bumpy said. "We're a community organization that happens to run numbers, and communities take care of their own." It was a remarkable transformation. What had started as a simple criminal enterprise had evolved into something more complex: a social network, a mutual aid society, a community protection system that happened to include illegal gambling. "What about Dutch?" someone called out. "What if he comes back?" Bumpy smiled. "He won't, because we made it too expensive to conquer us and too profitable to leave us alone. That's real power, not making enemies afraid to fight you, but making them see no point in fighting." The celebration lasted all night. Harlem was free, prosperous, and more united than ever. The war with Dutch Schultz had made them stronger. But Bumpy knew the victory was fragile. New threats would come. The law would keep pressing. The business would face new challenges. The difference was, now they were ready. Freedom from Dutch Schultz didn't mean freedom from problems. Within weeks, new challenges emerged. The federal raid had scared many players. They stopped betting, worried about arrests. Revenue dropped 30%. Operators who'd been brave during the war were suddenly cautious now that the external threat was gone. "We survived Dutch just to lose to fear?" Raymond complained. Bumpy had a different perspective. "We didn't fight a war just to keep doing the same things. Time to evolve." He called another meeting, this time including not just operators but community leaders, shop owners, ministers, teachers, and other respected residents. "The numbers racket employs 500 people in Harlem," Bumpy began. "It supports maybe 2,000 families. That's real economic power. But it's vulnerable because it's illegal, so we're going to make it less vulnerable." His plan was revolutionary. They'd create legitimate businesses, restaurants, barbershops, laundromats, social clubs, that employed the same people who ran numbers. The illegal operations would continue, but they'd be covered by real businesses paying real taxes. "It costs money up front," Bumpy admitted, "but it protects us. Police can't raid a legitimate barbershop just because they suspect numbers running in the back. And families have real jobs they can point to, real income to report." "You're talking about going legal?" asked Reverend Clayton skeptically. "I'm talking about being smart," Bumpy corrected. "The numbers game won't last forever. But the community will. We build real businesses now, and when the law eventually changes, we're positioned to transition completely." It was forward-thinking in a way most criminals couldn't imagine. Bumpy wasn't just running a racket, he was building legitimate community infrastructure that happened to include illegal gambling. The transformation took months. Bumpy invested heavily, helping operators open real businesses. A barbershop on 125th Street, a restaurant on Lenox, a social club in Sugar Hill. Each one employed neighborhood people, paid taxes, became a real part of Harlem's economy. And behind each legitimate business, the numbers operations continued, but safer, more protected, more sustainable. "You're laundering money," Junie observed. "I'm investing in the community," Bumpy replied. "There's a difference." By the end of 1933, Harlem's numbers operations had recovered and grown. But more importantly, they'd created 60 legitimate jobs, 3 new community gathering places, and a model for how criminal enterprises could evolve into something better. Not perfect, not completely legal, but better than what had come before. Dutch Schultz, fighting his own battles in the Bronx, never noticed how thoroughly he'd lost. Harlem hadn't just defeated him, they'd used the war as motivation to transform into something he could never threaten again. By 1934, Harlem's numbers operations had become a model of organized crime done right. Every morning, runners collected bets from hundreds of locations, legitimate businesses that served as fronts. Every afternoon, the drawing happened in a secure location, verified by trusted community members to prevent cheating. Every evening, winners collected their money. Always paid, always on time. The system worked because people trusted it. Unlike most illegal gambling, which was rigged or unreliable, Harlem's numbers were fair. A poor woman could bet a nickel and actually win. A family could rely on the system operating honestly. "We're providing a service," Bumpy explained to a skeptical minister. "Poor folks don't have access to Wall Street, to legitimate investments. The numbers game is their stock market. As long as it's fair, it's actually helping people." It was a controversial argument, but there was truth in it. The small profits most players earned, or even just the hope of winning, brightened hard lives during a difficult economic time. But Bumpy never forgot the dangers. Gambling addiction could destroy families. Some people bet money they needed for food. The system, however fair, could still cause harm. So he implemented new rules. No one could bet more than they could afford. Runners who exploited desperate people were fired. Winners who wanted help saving their money were connected with legitimate banks. The system tried to protect people from themselves. "You're running the world's most ethical, illegal operation," Junie joked. "I'm running the operation I can live with," Bumpy replied seriously. The approach worked. Federal agents still investigated, but they found operations that employed hundreds, paid winners fairly, and actually helped the community. Local police, many of whom played the numbers themselves, looked the other way. Politicians who relied on Harlem votes declined to push for crackdowns. Bumpy had done something remarkable. He'd made illegal gambling almost legitimate through careful management and community investment. But he never forgot Dutch Schultz's lesson. Power without community is vulnerable. Violence without strategy is expensive. Fear without trust is temporary. Harlem's system worked because it balanced all these elements. The operators made money, the community benefited, the players got fair treatment, and the system sustained itself. It wasn't perfect. Laws were still broken, people still gambled more than they should, problems still emerged. But compared to Dutch Schultz's approach, brutal, extractive, destructive, Bumpy's system was revolutionary. One evening, sitting in his apartment overlooking Harlem's bustling streets, Bumpy reflected on the journey. 2 years ago, Dutch Schultz had come to destroy them. Today, Harlem was stronger, more prosperous, more organized than ever. "You won," Junie said, joining him at the window. "We survived," Bumpy corrected. "There's a difference. Winning suggests the fight is over. Surviving means understanding the fight continues, just in different forms." Outside, Harlem lived and breathed. Families, businesses, music, life. This was what Bumpy had fought for. Not a criminal empire, but a thriving community that happened to include criminal elements. It was enough. October 23, 1935. The news hit Harlem like thunder. Dutch Schultz was dead. Shot in a Newark restaurant by rival mobsters, he died slowly, raving in a hospital, his empire already carved up by enemies who'd waited years for their chance. Bumpy heard the news without surprise. He'd watched Dutch overextend, fight too many battles, make too many enemies. The Bronx gangster's fall had been inevitable, not because he was weak, but because he'd never learned when to stop conquering and start consolidating. "Should we celebrate?" asked Raymond. "No," Bumpy said quietly. "Dutch was a monster, but he was also a human being. We don't celebrate death." But privately, Bumpy understood the significance. Dutch's death closed a chapter. The man who'd threatened to destroy Harlem was gone. The lessons learned fighting him had transformed their operations. In a strange way, Dutch Schultz's invasion had been the best thing that could have happened, because it had forced Harlem to evolve. Bumpy visited Dutch's old warehouse in the Bronx one last time. The building was abandoned now. Dutch's empire dissolved, his men scattered or arrested. The place that had once symbolized so much power was just an empty shell. "Thinking about old times?" asked Junie, who'd accompanied him. "Thinking about lessons," Bumpy replied. Dutch had everything: money, muscle, territory, but he lost because he never understood community. He saw people as resources to exploit, not neighbors to protect. And now he's dead while we're thriving. Bumpy nodded slowly. Strategy beats strength. Patience beats violence. Community beats conquest. Dutch never learned that. We did. They drove back to Harlem in silence. At the border between territories, Bumpy looked back at the Bronx one final time. Dutch Schultz's empire was already history, while Harlem's operations were still growing, still evolving, still protecting their community. That night, Bumpy held a private gathering for his closest advisors. Not to celebrate Dutch's death, but to honor the lessons learned fighting him. "We won because we stayed true to our principles," Bumpy said. We protected people instead of exploiting them. We built trust instead of fear. We thought long-term instead of short-term. That's how we survived Dutch, and that's how we'll survive whatever comes next." "What does come next?" asked Thomas. Bumpy smiled. "We keep building, keep evolving, keep protecting this community. Dutch is gone, but the work continues. That's the real victory, not outlasting one enemy, but creating something that outlasts all enemies." It was the perfect epitaph for their war. Dutch Schultz had come to conquer Harlem and had ultimately strengthened it instead. His invasion had unified the operators, organized the community, and forced innovation that transformed criminal enterprises into something more sustainable. In trying to destroy Harlem, Dutch had actually saved it, and now with him gone, Harlem could continue building the future he'd never understood was possible. Dutch Schultz's death didn't end organized crime's interest in Harlem. It just changed the players. By 1936, Italian mobsters from Lucky Luciano's organization started making inquiries. These men were smarter than Dutch, more organized, more patient. They didn't demand immediate control. They offered partnerships, alliances, mutual benefit. Bumpy recognized the approach immediately. This was how smart criminals operated, not through violence, but through cooperation that slowly became control. "They're more dangerous than Dutch ever was," he told his advisors, "because they make you think you're still independent right up until you realize you're not." The challenge was handling the overtures carefully. Refusing outright would create enemies. Accepting would mean losing independence. Bumpy needed a middle path, the same strategy that had worked with Dutch, but evolved. "We cooperate where it benefits us," he decided, "but we maintain clear boundaries. They can't operate in Harlem. We don't expand into their territory. We share information about threats, but not about operations." It was diplomatic organized crime, something new in New York's underworld. Lucky Luciano's representatives respected the approach. Unlike Dutch, they understood that strong, independent operators were more valuable as allies than as conquered territories. "Bumpy Johnson runs Harlem," they reported back to Luciano. "Smart, organized, connected to the community. Fighting him would be expensive. Better to have him as a friend." The mutual respect created a stable peace. Harlem remained independent. The Italians got a reliable ally who controlled his territory without requiring their resources. Everyone benefited. But Bumpy never forgot Dutch's lesson. Peace was maintained through strength. They kept building legitimate businesses, kept organizing the community, kept ensuring that Harlem was too strong, too united, too expensive to threaten. "You're turning into a statesman?" Junie joked. "I'm turning into a survivor," Bumpy corrected. "Same thing I've always been." Harlem's war with Dutch Schultz taught eternal lessons. Communities are stronger than criminals. Strategy beats strength. Patience outlasts violence, and the greatest victory is building something worth defending. These truths, learned in blood and struggle between 1931 and 1935, transformed Harlem from scattered operations into a unified community, a legacy that survived long after the last shot was fired. The transformation was remarkable. What had started as a desperate defense against Dutch Schultz had evolved into a sophisticated operation that balanced criminal enterprise with community development, illegal activity with legitimate business, independence with alliance. Harlem in 1936 was nothing like Harlem in 1931. The war had changed everything, mostly for the better. And Bumpy Johnson, the man who'd stood against Dutch Schultz when everyone thought resistance was impossible, had become something unexpected. A criminal leader who built instead of destroyed, who protected instead of exploited, who thought in terms of decades instead of days. It was a legacy Dutch could never have understood. By 1937, Harlem was experiencing a golden age. The numbers operations, now sophisticated and well-protected, employed over 1,000 people. The legitimate businesses that covered these operations had become real fixtures of the community. Not just fronts, but actual valuable enterprises. The barbershop on 125th Street was now the neighborhood's most popular meeting place. The restaurant on Lenox served the best soul food in Manhattan. The social club in Sugar Hill hosted jazz performances that rivaled the Cotton Club. "We're becoming respectable," Raymond observed with amusement. "We're becoming sustainable," Bumpy corrected. "There's a difference." The numbers game still operated, still broke laws, still existed in legal gray areas. But it was wrapped in so much legitimate business, employed so many people, contributed so much to the community that authorities found it increasingly difficult to target. "You've created a perfect defense," said a visiting minister. "The law can't attack the numbers operations without hurting legitimate businesses and innocent families." "That was always the plan," Bumpy replied. But the real success wasn't the criminal enterprise, it was the community transformation. Harlem in 1937 was more prosperous, more organized, more politically powerful than ever. The unity forced by Dutch Schultz's invasion had created networks that extended far beyond gambling. Neighborhood associations formed to address community issues. Business councils advocated for local interests. Political organizations registered voters and pushed for representation. The infrastructure built to resist Dutch had evolved into genuine community power. Bumpy watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He'd started as a criminal protecting criminal interests. He'd become something different, a community leader who happened to run illegal operations. The distinction mattered. "You thinking about going legitimate?" Junie asked one evening. Bumpy considered the question seriously. "I'm thinking about protecting what we've built. If that means eventually transitioning away from numbers, fine. If it means maintaining the system while adding more legitimate businesses, also fine. The goal isn't staying criminal or becoming legitimate, it's keeping the community strong." It was a pragmatic philosophy, born from years of careful observation and hard-won experience. Dutch Schultz had taught Bumpy that pure criminal power was vulnerable. The successful integration of legal and illegal operations had taught him that hybrid systems were sustainable. "What would you tell your younger self?" asked Thomas, the youngest operator present. "Back in 1931, when Dutch first arrived?" Bumpy smiled. "I'd tell myself that the war ahead would make us stronger, that every challenge would teach us something valuable. That defeat isn't losing a battle, it's failing to learn from it." He looked around the room at men who'd fought beside him, planned with him, built something remarkable together. "And I'd tell myself that the real victory isn't defeating enemies, it's building something worth defending." Success brought new challenges, particularly regarding family and succession. Bumpy had no biological children, but he'd become a father figure to dozens of young men in Harlem. Runners who'd started as teenagers were now adults with families. Operators who'd been green recruits were now experienced leaders. The question of legacy became urgent. "Who takes over when you're gone?" Junie asked bluntly one day. Bumpy had been thinking about this constantly. Unlike Dutch, who'd ruled through fear and individual power, Bumpy had built a system. The system needed to outlast him. "Nobody takes over," he finally said. "The council does." He proposed a radical solution. Instead of a single leader, Harlem's operations would be run by a council of the most trusted operators. Decisions would be collective. Power would be shared. No single person could become a dictator or sell out the community. "That's never been done," Raymond protested. "Criminal organizations need a boss." "Criminal organizations need leadership," Bumpy corrected. "Leadership can come from one person or from a group. We've built something different here. Why not govern it differently?" The proposal was controversial, but it made sense. The strength of Harlem's operations had always been community and cooperation. Why should leadership be any different? Over the following months, Bumpy began training the council system. 5 senior operators met weekly to discuss strategy, resolve disputes, and plan for the future. Bumpy attended but didn't dominate. He taught them to think collectively, to value consensus over individual power. "You're building something that will outlast you," observed Reverend Clayton during one of their regular conversations. "I'm building something that doesn't depend on me," Bumpy clarified. "Dutch's empire died with him because everything depended on Dutch. I want Harlem's system to survive, whoever leads it." The approach extended to family matters too. Bumpy began using profits to establish education funds for runners' children, to help families buy homes, to create genuine wealth that would last generations. "You're thinking like a patriarch," Junie observed. "I'm thinking like someone who understands that criminal enterprises are temporary but communities are permanent," Bumpy replied. The numbers game might last 5 years or 50 years. But these families, these neighborhoods, they'll be here long after we're gone. Our job is to help them thrive. It was a remarkable evolution. The man who'd fought Dutch Schultz to protect his criminal interests had transformed into something more complex. A community builder who used criminal profits to create legitimate opportunities. "What's your end game?" asked Thomas one evening. Bumpy looked out at Harlem's streets, alive with activity even after dark. "My end game is that 50 years from now, someone asks about these times and hears a story about how Harlem protected itself, built itself, made itself strong, not about gangsters and violence, but about community and resilience." "That's ambitious." "That's necessary," Bumpy corrected. "Legacy isn't about being remembered, it's about leaving something worth remembering." In 1938, the system faced its greatest tests since Dutch Schultz, a massive federal investigation into organized crime across New York. Thomas Dewey, an ambitious prosecutor, was targeting every major criminal operation in the city. He'd already taken down several organizations. Now, he was looking at Harlem. "They're building a case," reported Bumpy's lawyer nervously. "Grand jury, informants, surveillance. Dewey wants to make an example of someone." Bumpy remained calm. "Then we need to make sure that someone isn't us." The strategy required everything they'd learned. First, they activated the legitimate business cover, showing that most operations were legal enterprises, paying taxes and employing citizens. Second, they demonstrated community benefit, documenting how their investments had revitalized neighborhoods. Third, they made cooperation difficult. The collective leadership structure meant no single person could be targeted as the boss. "You're making it expensive to prosecute you," the lawyer observed admiringly. "I'm making it pointless to prosecute us," Bumpy corrected. "Dewey wants easy wins against clear villains. We're not clear villains, we're complicated." The investigation continued for months. Federal agents interviewed hundreds of people. They examined records, followed money, built cases, but they kept encountering the same problem. Harlem's operations were so intertwined with legitimate businesses and community support that attacking them meant attacking the neighborhood itself. "You've weaponized being helpful," observed a frustrated agent during one questioning. Bumpy smiled slightly. "I've created a system where criminal activity supports legitimate community development. You can't destroy one without harming the other." It was the ultimate evolution of the strategy that had defeated Dutch Schultz. Don't just be strong, be valuable. Don't just protect criminal interests, create community interests that happen to include criminal elements. The investigation eventually focused elsewhere, on easier targets with clearer criminal organizations. Dewey got his convictions and his headlines, but Harlem remained untouched. "We survived," Junie said with relief when the threat passed. "We evolved," Bumpy corrected. "Dutch tried to conquer us with violence. Dewey tried to destroy us with law. Both failed because we're not just a criminal organization, we're a community support system that includes criminal elements. You can't kill us without hurting innocent people." It was a sophisticated defense, years in the making, born from the lessons of fighting Dutch Schultz, and it worked. But Bumpy knew the victory was temporary. New threats would come. The law would keep trying, rivals would keep probing, the system would face endless tests. The difference was now they were ready for anything. "What's next?" asked Raymond. Bumpy looked at his council of operators, at the map of Harlem on the wall, at the list of legitimate businesses and community investments. "Next we keep building," he said simply. "Keep evolving, keep protecting. That's how we survive, not by winning every battle, but by being too valuable to destroy." By 1939, Bumpy Johnson was 42 years old and had been protecting Harlem for over a decade. The war with Dutch Schultz seemed like ancient history now, but its lessons remained fresh. He sat in his apartment one evening with his closest advisors, the men who'd fought beside him, planned with him, built something remarkable together. "Remember when Dutch first came?" asked Junie, now gray at the temples. "I remember thinking we'd lose," Raymond admitted. "He had everything, money, muscle, territory. We had nothing but stubbornness." "We had community," Bumpy corrected quietly. "That was always the difference. Dutch saw Harlem as territory to conquer. We saw it as home to protect." Thomas, no longer the youngest operator, raised a question that had been bothering him. Do you ever regret the choices we made? The deals with Dutch, the compromise, the years of paying tribute? Bumpy considered carefully. I regret that violence was necessary at all. I regret that good people got hurt. But the strategy? No. We did what was needed to survive and grow stronger. Sometimes the smart move looks like weakness in the moment. Dutch thought he'd won, Junie reflected. He died thinking he'd defeated us. In some ways he did defeat us, Bumpy said thoughtfully. He changed us, forced us to evolve, made us better at what we do. His invasion transformed Harlem's operations from scattered criminal enterprises into a unified community system. He defeated the old Harlem. He just didn't realize we'd become something new. The conversation turned to the future. The numbers operations were still profitable, but the world was changing. The economy was recovering from the Depression. New laws were being considered. The political landscape was shifting. How much longer can we maintain the system? Asked Raymond. As long as we keep evolving, Bumpy replied. The specific business might change. Numbers, then something else, then eventually maybe nothing illegal at all. But the community support system? That can last forever. It was a vision of transformation. Criminal enterprises gradually becoming legitimate businesses, while maintaining the community networks and support systems that made them valuable. You're planning for a world without crime? Thomas asked skeptically. I'm planning for a world where crime becomes irrelevant, Bumpy clarified. Where the legitimate businesses we've built are so successful, so valuable, so integrated into the community that the illegal operations naturally fade away. Not because we get caught, but because we don't need them anymore. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but it was also the logical conclusion of everything they'd learned fighting Dutch Schultz. Sustainable success required constant evolution toward legitimacy. What would Dutch think of this plan? Junie asked with dark humor. Bumpy smiled. Dutch would call it weak. He'd say real criminals stay criminals. But Dutch is dead, and we're still here. That's the answer. By 1940, the transformation was complete. Harlem's numbers operations still existed, but were now just one component of a larger economic network. The legitimate businesses employed 3 times as many people as the illegal operations. Community investments had created lasting wealth. The political organization had become a real force in New York politics. You've created an empire, observed Reverend Clayton during one of their regular conversations. I've created a community that happens to include an empire. Bumpy corrected. There's a difference. The council system was working perfectly. 5 senior operators, Junie, Raymond, Thomas, and 2 others, were now making most daily decisions collectively. Bumpy attended meetings but rarely needed to intervene. The system ran itself. You've made yourself unnecessary, Junie joked. That's either very smart or very sad. It's the goal, Bumpy replied seriously. Leaders who make themselves necessary create vulnerable systems. I wanted to create a system so strong that losing any single leader, including me, wouldn't matter. The test came sooner than expected. In late 1940, Bumpy was arrested on an old charge. The authorities couldn't touch the current operations, so they went after past crimes. He faced years in prison. This is it, Raymond said urgently. Without you, the system might collapse. But Bumpy was calm. This is exactly what we've been preparing for. The system doesn't need me, it needs good leadership. You 5 are good leaders. Keep doing what we've been doing. Protect the community, evolve the businesses, maintain the networks. I'll be back eventually. He went to prison in early 1941, and Harlem held its breath. But the system didn't collapse. The council took over smoothly. Operations continued. Legitimate businesses thrived. Community support systems remained strong. Everything Bumpy had built kept functioning without him. From prison, he received regular reports. The news was consistently good. Harlem was not just surviving but thriving. The absence of a single strong leader had forced collective responsibility, making the system even stronger. You did it, wrote Junie in one letter. You created something that outlasted you being there. Dutch never accomplished that. Bumpy wrote back, Dutch built an empire. We built a community. That's why his died and ours lives. It was the ultimate victory, not just defeating Dutch Schultz in battle, but defeating his entire philosophy. Criminal enterprises didn't have to be based on individual power and violence. They could be based on community, cooperation, and collective strength. And when built that way, they could last beyond any single leader, beyond any single threat, beyond even the lifetime of their founder. In his prison cell, Bumpy Johnson smiled. The war with Dutch Schultz had ended 9 years ago, but its true outcome was only now becoming clear. They hadn't just won a battle, they'd changed what victory meant. Years later, long after Bumpy returned from prison, long after Dutch Schultz was forgotten by everyone except historians, people would ask about those times. What was it like, fighting Dutch Schultz, they'd ask. And Bumpy would smile and tell them the truth. It made us who we are. The war had transformed everything. Before Dutch, Harlem's numbers operations were scattered, competitive, sometimes corrupt. After Dutch, they were unified, organized, community-focused. The threat of conquest had forced cooperation. The need for survival had demanded evolution. Dutch Schultz was the best thing that ever happened to us, Bumpy would say, shocking younger listeners. Not because we wanted him here, but because fighting him made us better. The lesson applied beyond crime. It applied to communities, to businesses, to any organization facing threats. Challenges didn't have to destroy you. They could transform you. Enemies didn't have to defeat you. They could strengthen you, but only if you were smart about it. What would you tell young people today? Asked a visitor to Bumpy's office in 1950. Bumpy, now 53 and almost entirely legitimate, thought carefully. I'd tell them that strength isn't about never being threatened. It's about how you respond to threats. Dutch Schultz tried to destroy us with violence. We defeated him with community. That's a lesson that applies to everything. He looked out at Harlem's streets, busier and more prosperous than ever. The legitimate businesses that had started as covers for numbers operations were now the main enterprises. The community networks, built to resist Dutch, had become genuine civic organizations. The system created for survival had become a template for success. War changes people, Bumpy continued. It can make them bitter, violent, destructive, or it can make them thoughtful, strategic, community-focused. We chose the second path. That's why we're still here. The visitor asked one final question. Do you regret the criminal life? Bumpy was honest. I regret the harm caused. I regret the people hurt. I regret that lawbreaking was necessary. But I don't regret protecting my community when the system failed them. I don't regret building something that helped families survive. And I don't regret learning, every single day, how to do things better. Outside, Harlem lived and breathed, a community that had survived Dutch Schultz, survived the Depression, survived racism and poverty, and 1,000 other challenges. A community that had learned, through struggle, to protect itself and build itself and make itself strong. The war with Dutch Schultz was just one chapter in that story. But it was the chapter that taught the most important lesson. True strength comes from community, from strategy, from building something worth defending. Dutch Schultz came to conquer Harlem with violence and died in violence. Bumpy Johnson defended Harlem with intelligence and built something that lasted generations. In the end, that was the real victory. Not winning a battle, but creating a legacy worth remembering. And 50 years later, 90 years later, 100 years later, people would still tell stories about how Harlem stood against a monster and won. Not through greater violence, but through greater wisdom. That was the war that made them. That was the victory that lasted.